Well, now it's my great honor and privilege to introduce our Convocation speaker, Vernon Jordan. Sometimes it's a challenge to find a speaker whose life and work perfectly embodies the values and aspirations of our school, but in this case, it was an easy choice. Vernon Jordan is one of the towering, and I mean this both literally and figuratively, figures of his generation. The trajectory of Vernon's life carves through some of the most important events of the past 70 years. As Vernon would be the first to tell you, his was not a rags to riches story, but it is a story of determination, conviction, courage, and leadership. From a childhood in Jim Crow, Georgia, and segregated public schools, through DePaul University and Howard Law School, to his path-breaking legal work on integrating the University of Georgia, to increasingly important leadership roles with the NAACP, the Voter Education Project, the United Negro College Fund, and finally, in 1971, as Executive Director of the Urban League, Vernon was a pioneer at one of the most difficult and transformational times in the history of our country since the Civil War. Now, Vernon's career included only a short stint in government, but fittingly for us, at the Office of Economic Opportunity under President Johnson and Sarge Shriver in 1965. But throughout his life, he has proved how many different ways there are to engage in public service and be an agent of change. Vernon has been an advisor to presidents. He served as the co-chair of President Clinton's presidential transition, and to the leading business and financial leaders of our nation. His counsel is sought around the world. For almost 40 years, he's been an active participant in the prestigious Bilderberg meetings, bringing together government and business leaders of the United States and Europe to discuss the key issues of the day. He's been a longtime law partner of our own Bob Strauss. But just as Vernon has been sought by the great and the good, he has always had time for younger people, and his role as a mentor to so many, including, I'm happy to say myself, has played such an important part in developing a next generation of leadership. It's particularly fitting that Vernon speak to us in this centennial year of Lyndon Johnson's birth. Vernon served on 2 advisory committees under LBJ, the White House Council to Fulfill These Rights, and the Presidential Advisory Committee on the Selective Service, where a young man named Charles Rangel was the general counsel. He remained in touch with President Johnson until LBJ's death, giving the keynote address at a conference on civil rights right here at the LBJ Library in December 1972. At that conference, which was attended by Thurgood Marshall, Roy Wilkins, Earl Warren, and Barbara Jordan, among others, President Johnson said, "Of all the records that are housed in this library, it is the record of this work on civil rights that holds the most of myself in it." But after recounting the achievements of the 1960s, President Johnson concluded, "Let no one delude themselves by thinking that our work is done." Now, in his speech, Vernon also reflected on the achievements of the past and the challenges ahead. In words that will strike a particular chord with our graduates today, Vernon said, "The strategies that black people and committed white people must develop in the 70s will revolve around issues like revenue sharing, metropolitan government, and internal regulation of federal and state regulatory agencies. The battleground has shifted from the streets where people march to end segregation on the buses, to computer rooms where analysts will have to examine data on bus routes where black people live and where they travel to work, and on alternative rate structures that will make riding cheaper for poor people." That was an insight that underlay the founding of the LBJ School in those very years and continues to motivate our faculty and students today. In his autobiography, Vernon Can Read, he recounts a conversation that many of us will recognize as vintage LBJ. Vernon was in his office when he was told that President Johnson was on the phone. "Vernon," said President Johnson, "I did a lot for your people." "Of course you did, Mr. President. But why are you calling me?" "I'm calling because my boy Chuck," that is Chuck Robb, "is the head of that forum that damn fool Kennedy boy started at UVA Law School. And I want you to speak for him. You hear?" Well, of course, Vernon went. And as so many times in his life, he reached out and made a difference in young people's lives. And that's why we're so fortunate to have him here today as our speaker. Colleagues, students, and friends, please join me in welcoming Vernon Jordan.
Dean Steinberg, members of the faculty, Lucy Johnson, alumni, family, friends, and the class of 2008 from the LBJ School. I am honored and privileged to be here. On a beautiful Sunday morning in June, 51 years ago, I sat where you sit, anxious, excited, weary, waiting to be awarded my hard-earned degree. The speaker at my commencement was perhaps the most prominent corporate leader of the day. He rose and he proceeded to deliver the longest, most boring, most uninspiring address ever inflicted upon a graduating class. It was full of sound and fury, signifying absolutely nothing. And so today, graduates, you have my deepest sympathy and empathy as you await my discourse, because believing as I do in equal opportunity, I plan to do to you the same thing my commencement speaker did to me. First, let me congratulate you for the hard work you have done to get to this special moment. Your parents and loved ones who have supported your education deserve your lasting thanks. I congratulate them for pushing, pulling, and standing by you, and for the sacrifices they have made to help you reach this significant moment in your life. Second, this is the first time that I've ever come to the LBJ School when Dean Elspeth Rostow was not here to greet me with a warm smile and a huge hug. We all miss her presence, her intellect, her leadership, and her passion for this institution. Third, my first invitation here to the LBJ School and Library was personally extended by President Johnson himself when he invited me, as Dean has alluded to keynote his historic Civil Rights Symposium in December of 1972. After I finished my talk, President Johnson took me into the green room and complimented me on my effort, and he said, "Now, Vernon, you know why I invited you?" I said, "No, sir." He said, "I invited you because you and I have a lot in common. I grew up poor and white in the South. You grew up poor and black in the South. And we both achieved in our careers pretty well. Then both of us, you and I, succeeded great men under tragic circumstances. John Kennedy was assassinated, Whitney Young drowned. There was great doubt about our ability to succeed these great men. And except for Vietnam, I was a good president, he said. And then he said, and Vernon, I brought you here to help you get off to a good start. And I have some advice for you, son, that I could not follow myself because the nation was in deep mourning. And my advice to you, son, is to get your own people. I could not get rid of Kennedy, McNamara, or Bundy, or others, but you can get rid of whomever you damn well please. How ironic that such an outsized political figure as Lyndon Baines Johnson, one of those people for whom the phrase larger than life seemed to have been invented, should be so unremarked upon, so ignored in the political discourse and the public consciousness today. Lyndon Johnson's presidency was one of enormous achievement. In several crucial ways, he built out the framework for the reform of American society, for assisting its transformation from a quasi-democracy, one deeply shadowed by legalized racism, to a democracy in fact. It was Lyndon Johnson who astutely produced congressional enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and President Johnson again, who employed the full force of his legendary powers of persuasion to guide the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965 through the Congress in response to and out of respect for the march from Selma to Montgomery. That act, bought and paid for by the courage, suffering, and endurance of generations of Black Americans and their allies among other Americans, transformed America by bringing Black Americans fully into the political process. In 1964, before its passage, there were only about 350 Black elected officials in the country, including just 4 Blacks in the House of Representatives. Today, there are more than 9,000 Blacks in local and state elective offices and 40 serving in the Congress, including one who has mounted a historic campaign for the presidency of the United States. But make no mistake, Barack Obama is not the only presidential candidate who is a beneficiary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So is Hillary Clinton, just as she is a beneficiary of the 19th Amendment passed in 1920 and the feminist movement of the 1960s. And so, for good measure, were Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, 2 Southern Democrats who, without passage of the Voting Rights Act, would never have had successful runs for the White House. But it is a further irony that a president who was so obsessed with doing good and whose legislative program did foster so much good should have had his term of office so racked by tragedy. One part of the miasma of tragedy that overtook Lyndon Johnson involved the shocking chain of political murders that cast such a long shadow over American society during those years. President Kennedy's assassination in 1973, Malcolm X in 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. in April 1968, and Robert F. Kennedy in June 1968. These murders were the foundation of the extraordinary turbulence and polarization of the mid and late 60s that framed and undermined the Johnson presidency. The nation's profound grief over the Kennedy assassination was exacerbated by the powerful suspicion that it had loosed a dangerous force in the society which no one could control. The subsequent killings seemed to confirm it, particularly since they occurred against the backdrop of three other patterns of violence. One was the violence white Southern racists continued to use against civil rights activists and Southern blacks. Sheriff Bull Connor's unleashing the Birmingham City Police in 1963, May thereof, and the fire department against nonviolent demonstrators, and the bombing in September of '63 of the 16th Street Baptist Church that killed 4 little girls in Sunday school, the June '64 murder of the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi, and the attack of the Alabama State Troopers on the civil rights marchers at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in March of 1965, are just 3 of the numerous acts of violence occurred along the civil rights front during Lyndon Johnson's term in office. The second pattern of violence, seemingly paradoxically, erupted just when the landmark legislative goals of the civil rights movement had been achieved. The Harlem riot in the summer of 1964 was the harbinger. The explosion in Los Angeles Watts in July '65, ushering in 6 years of long, hot summers, was proof that some part of the vast pool of anger built up within Black America during the reign of Jim Crow could no longer be held in check by the hope or the reality of legislative reform. That Watts exploded just 6 days after President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of '65 made its meaning all the more clear. The third and last pattern of violence constituted the greatest tragedy of the Johnson presidency, his mistaken prosecution of the war in Southeast Asia. The bitter divide among Americans over the war sharply intensified the more generalized population that split the country during the late 1960s. And all of these things stoked a spreading sense of unease, even despair, as a turmoil within America's borders at times seems to have evolved into one continual domestic crisis. Some thought the very fabric of American society was disintegrating. But these tragedies have for far too long overshadowed the good that President Lyndon Baines Johnson produced. And it is vital at this moment of immense political importance and controversy to recall an administration which saw government as an agent of and for the people and as a tool for expanding equality of opportunity. Nowhere was the depth of the progressive, compassionate commitment informing Lyndon Johnson's views and actions more evident than in the arena of civil rights. His own childhood of hard-scrabble poverty in East Texas enabled him to intuitively understand and empathize with the profound sense of dispossession Black Americans felt, and his own courage of determination to do what was best for America enabled him to break free of the political shackles white racism imposed on Southern white office holders. In mobilizing the full power of the federal government behind the goals of the civil rights movement, Lyndon Baines Johnson performed an inestimable act of public service. He did so even though he well understood the political cost in the South to his own party. As author Nick Couch writes in his 2005 book, Judgment Days, and I quote him, "The racist reaction to the freedom struggle in the South only hardened Johnson's resolve. Cautioned by some of his aides that he was being too zealous in support of equal rights, Lyndon Johnson thundered in response, 'Well, what the hell's the presidency for?' Indeed, what is the presidency of the United States of America for, but to aid Americans in building a more perfect union and to lead America to a secure, vibrant role in the world community, our increasingly interconnected global village. So today, and against this background, you graduate from the Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas in the centennial year of LBJ's birth, a year in which the average price of a gallon of gasoline is closing in on $4, a year in which oil prices have pushed above $120 a barrel, a year in which the unraveling of the subprime housing market has already cost a growing number of commercial and investment banks billions of dollars, some chief executives their jobs, and one venerable Wall Street firm its very existence. It's also estimated that 2 million people will lose their homes over the next several years, and it's likely that many of them will never become homeowners again. A year in which both our moral authority abroad and our moral compass at home continues to shrink. A year in which the vast majority of Americans continue to declare that they want our servicemen and women out of Iraq. But to you, graduates of the LBJ School of Public Affairs, the turbulent times we're in should be a cause not of despair, but of inspiration. For there is work to be done. There are problems to be solved, if not completely solved at this moment, at the least reduced in severity. And there are people and whole societies to be helped. And yonder in America and the world, our people cry out, asking, pleading, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? That's why you came to this institution and why you took up the challenge of earning your degree, to conceptualize and implement creative solutions to some of the problems facing our society. Yes, you came to turn the question mark into an exclamation point, answering, yes, there is a balm in Gilead, there is a physician there, there is a whole world awaiting the application of your intelligence, your skills, your ambition, your compassion. And in that regard, how fortunate we are. Your graduation comes not a moment too soon. In that regard, how fortunate you are, for you will not lack challenges that will test all that you have learned in the classroom and will test your ability to learn in the classroom of the world beyond the academy. Do not succumb to the prophecies of doom and gloom. Be aware of them, but do not succumb. Recognize that crises are a part of the cycle of history, whether economic, such as the Great Depression, or social, such as the crisis of the civil rights movement of the 60s. Crises are a test of a nation's ingenuity and character. That test is upon us all now, but responding to it is most especially your generation's challenge, because you must carry America deeper into the 21st century. This is a point my friend Tom Friedman made in his Sunday column in the New York Times 2 weeks ago. Will you answer the challenge that Friedman characterized as the overwhelming hunger among the American people to do nation building in America? Will you help Americans reduce their indulgence of what Friedman calls the subprime values of essentially trying to get something for nothing for as long as you can? That wrong-headed value system infected many at the top as well as at the bottom of our society. Will you help Americans return to the values of hard work, sacrifice, studiousness, thrift, and patriotism? We still have the potential for greatness, but only, said Friedman, if we get back to work on our country. Albert Einstein defined his 3 rules of work this way: out of clutter, find simplicity; out of discord, find harmony; and in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Einstein's prescription is, in effect, the same as that found in Chinese ideography. There, the written character meaning crisis is actually a combination of 2 characters, the left one meaning danger and the right one meaning opportunity. In other words, in every crisis lies opportunity. It is your task, your responsibility, your obligation to find and exploit the opportunities in the many crises facing America and the peoples and nations of the world. So that is your fate, your charge to keep, your calling to fulfill, your rendezvous with destiny. And as you depart these hallowed grounds here at the University of Texas, at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, I bid you to hear the words of Langston Hughes. Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Good luck, and God bless you.
Thank you, Vernon. I think you can tell by the response how appreciative we are and what an impact those inspiring words have for all of us here today. It's a great honor to have you here. And in the tradition of the LBJ School and the LBJ Foundation, I'd like to present to you this bust of President Johnson by the sculptor Robert Perks.